you. What you're seeing and hearing is the Roland AE30, their flagship wind synthesizer. Roland is a rather unique company. They've been around for 50 years. Their instruments are just found in every corner of the world, and their instruments have defined entire genres. But what's perhaps less known about Roland is their unique approach to localization when entering the Chinese market. From the hyper-esoteric GU10, a pedal designed specifically for guzheng, to the folk instruments found on their wind synthesizers when shipped out in China. Roland is unique in this approach because the electronic music equipment industry in China has been very slow to adoption. Some would actually say it's several generations behind. Why is that? We're going to be talking a lot about electronic music instruments in this presentation, so let me lay down some groundwork. What is a synthesizer? A synthesizer is an electronic music instrument, and it's not a digital piano. It generates a tone using generally oscillators. It starts off very simple. That tone is then processed through a series of electronic components. And with a little bit of modulation, a little bit of messing around, you get something totally new and unique. The synthesizer is the key tool in sonic exploration, exploring and creating new music, not just by trying out new melodies and lyrics, but building new timbres, building new sounds. A little bit of history, if you're not familiar. Synthesizers, well, they go back about 100 years, depending on what metric, but for the sake of simplicity, the first synthesizer you could walk into a music store and buy was in America, back in the 1970s. A few years later, Japan picked up a lot of the slack, a lot of mass production, and for the next 25 years, between the 70s and the 90s, most synthesizers on the market came from these two countries. Now, if you're a real synthesizer geek like me, you might be interested to know that a lot of countries actually had engineers working on synthesizers. The Italian Synthex, the theremin in the bottom corner there from Russia, that actually goes back to 1927. I find the ethnomusicological implications of the synthesizer fascinating. I mean, this is an instrument without an inherent cultural bias, because electronic engineering, the skills needed to make these sort of things, is a universal concept. And musicians from any country in the world can take any one of these synthesizers and integrate it into their own music. Now, during this golden era of synthesizers being developed around the world, what was China doing? Surely, 90% of synthesizers on the market right now are manufactured here, but was one ever born here? Was there ever a synthesizer invented and created in China? There was one. In the 1970s, there was an inventor called Tianjin Qin, and he invented this thing called the Dianziqin. His story is so fascinating. He wanted to play the guzheng when he was young, but he couldn't quite afford one. So he bought a secondhand Taisho Koto. He added electronic components to it, first to amplify it, then to filter it and change its sound, eventually replacing the strings altogether with oscillators. He invented a synthesizer, but without precedence. He had no access to the information about synthesizers that were being manufactured overseas. He came to this conclusion entirely on his own, only a few years later. His story is amazing. So, unfortunately, he didn't really have the chance to tell his entire story. He didn't have the chance, the opportunity to inspire generations of Chinese engineers to make iterations of his work, to follow in his footsteps. This might explain why China is several generations behind in the world of niche synthesizer development. And I find that heartbreaking. It is the honor of a lifetime to be able to tell his story. We went to Taiyuan, we talked to him. He is still around. He is still inventing synthesizers to this day. And he is beloved by the synthesizer community in China today, because he was the one who answered the question. Yes, there was a synthesizer made in China. So I can't think of a better way to honor his legacy than to talk a little bit about what synthesizers are being made in China today, who is following in his footsteps, and who is building the future of sound in China. Now, we'll be talking about indie devs and big players alike, but let's start with Medley, a brand you might recognize if you have a digital piano at home. About 10 years ago, they had a new product manager in, and he said, I have an idea. Let's make a synthesizer. Why not? You know, maybe the market is still primarily overseas, but we have the factories, we've got the manpower. Let's take a risk. Let's innovate, and let's try it. Within a few years, they invent the Hydrasynth. Now, it might not look too different from what we've seen so far, but there's something very important about this synthesizer. This may be the very first synthesizer to be entirely designed, manufactured, every chip, every sound in China. This is the first Chinese synthesizer to enter the global market by several metrics. And without going too in-depth into the actual functions of what this thing is, it ticks all the boxes. It is so versatile. It's got so many functions. It sounds amazing. And it was received so well by the global market. This is an amazing first contender for the Chinese synthesizer market. But users of synthesizers aren't always looking for the most versatile. They want something with a strong design philosophy. They want the weird, the wild, the crazy, the sonic exploration tools that give them some kind of inspiration. They like a good story. They like to know who made their synthesizer. Enter Meng Qi. Meng Qi is just this mad scientist inventor in Beijing. He's sort of the first indie synth developer in China to find some success overseas, thanks in part to partnerships with global distributors. His synthesizers are so amazingly unique because they are so about his own personal philosophy, his own design. They are vividly complex, but all that complexity is drenched in a sort of creative abstraction. Instead of talking about filter banks, you've got terms like bird, and flow, and they're just these amazing, amazing devices. They're all, they have little tiny ones too. This one likes the sun. You can hear it crying, the cricket. And this is his latest invention, the Horizon, a wonderful little design. And, again, in terms of sonic exploration, it's a little bit out there. Very unique. I'm not much of a noisemaker, but it can do melodies, it can do some very, very interesting and complex things. So Meng Qi is one of the names that the global community thinks about when they think of Chinese synthesizers. They think of ASM and they think of Meng Qi. But his lack of a cohort, a lack of other synthesizer manufacturers here showing their work to the world, has sort of created a mystique about Chinese synthesizers. Are all Chinese synthesizers like this? Are there more synthesizers like this? I've asked around, I've done as much research as I can. It seems there's about 24 or so indie synth developers in China making their content, putting it on Xianyu, and just trying to share their works to the world. They're all vividly unique. Electro Weird, based in Beijing, he sort of embraces, again, the no cultural bias, the electronic tinkering as his culture, the solder fumes and the PCBs. Sinso is based in Zhejiang, and he does beginner-friendly and all sorts of control modules. Felix does open source development. Modular Theater does little devices that talk and interact with one another. Coding Inspire is all about versatility, 12-in-1. Modular Key, it's got a community, like a big WeChat group where all these DIY people talk. These are only 6, but I think that there's going to be hundreds more of this coming out of China. But these are the voices I truly want to celebrate because they are the ones taking the risk and innovating. They all know Tianjin, they all know the story, and they feel that they're the next generation of creators innovating in China and soon showing the world what they're made of. Now, it's not just indie devs in this world as well. We also have the big foreign companies doing interesting things for the Chinese market. Native Instruments, a German company, they're doing some very, very interesting work this month, working with Chinese ethnomusicologists to preserve the sound of Ming Dynasty era instruments. So as opposed to just playing digital guzheng and pipa, you have instruments like the si. Again, in collaboration with Chinese ethnomusicologists, fascinating. Arturia, the young French manufacturer, they've taken a sort of different route. Again, embracing sonic exploration. They're focusing on using the timbres of traditional Chinese instruments fused with electronics to create some very interesting tones. So there's a lot to be excited about. Now, it's not just the synthesizer manufacturers who are innovating, and it's not just the indie devs. Innovation is a really touchy subject in the world of the traditional Chinese instrument manufacturers. You know, there's been attempts to codify the way these instruments are made and performed for hundreds of years. But the thing is, there's hundreds of factories making guzheng, and there's millions of people playing them. Why not innovate? Why not take a risk and try something new? Which leads me to the Dianzheng by Jinyun Instruments in Yangzhou. It is a carbon fiber, all black electric guzheng, and it's designed for silent practice at home, but to me, this is the epitome of Sino-futurism. This is like a look into China 2077, some crazy cyberpunk instrument of Chinese future. I think any company willing to take a risk on something like this should be celebrated. We also have Nasher, a zhongran manufacturer, and they've developed this amazingly sleek electric zhongran. So I think these instrument manufacturers deserve, just a little credit for trying new inventions and giving the traditional instrument industry a little bit of a facelift. Now, if you really want to look into the future of sound in China, you ought to look to Xinghai Conservatory of Music. They've recently opened up a program called the Electric Music Instrument Engineering Program. I think I got that right. They believe that the creation of these new instruments in China creates emotional and social value. They feel that they're approaching industry pain points. They take students. Every student does a certain project each semester. They pick their own target audience. It's a really vividly interesting program, creating really fantastic user-based products. So this is very much the next generation of instrument creators in China. And if you're interested, have a look at the program. Now, everything I've talked about so far can be summed up with a one-day trip to Beijing next week, Modular Commune. What started as a little meetup of these synthesizer musicians blossomed into just this wonderful expo. There's nothing like this in China. It is the coolest day of the year. Every developer I've talked about so far will be there. The indie devs get to show their stuff for free alongside the bigger manufacturers. They pay their musicians, which is very unique, unlike Superbooth in Germany. It is just such a magical event because there's so much innovation on display, and the energy is there. They've got workshops. They've got an ambient music garden. It is such a wonderful resolve to see all of this innovation coming together in one space. I talk about this because this is a subject that means a lot to me as a musician, as a synth guy, and a lover of traditional Chinese instruments. But it's not just the synthesizer industry. I think stifled innovation has cost a lot of industries a lot of time and effort, and I think that we should truly celebrate the voices that are putting their best forward and trying to push their industry forward. Maybe it's not the niche synthesizer industry, maybe it's your own industry, but you should look towards who is doing the most work to have their voice heard, to create something new. I'd like to thank Mr. Tian Jinqin for a lifetime of work. I'd like to thank all the creators who offered their support today. I'd like to thank all of you. Thank you.